I had been working as a nurse on the general medical ward for about 5 years at that point. I loved my job, despite the long hours and occasional difficult patients. Over the years, I had seen my fair share of strange cases come through those hospital doors, but nothing could have prepared me for the unsettling experience with the psychic patient. It was a crisp autumn evening when she was first admitted after suffering a stroke that left her with limited mobility. An elderly woman, probably in her late 70s, with a warm, grandmotherly demeanor. However, her chart noted that her admitting diagnosis was cerebrovascular accident, but it also stated her occupation as self-proclaimed psychic medium. Some of the younger nurses giggled when they read that, but I had learned not to be too judgmental. People from all walks of life come through hospital doors. As I began caring for the woman over the next few days, I learned she'd been giving psychic readings professionally for over 40 years. She came from a long line of self-proclaimed mediums and claimed her abilities emerged when she was just a child. The elderly psychic had an eccentric look with long flowing skirts and dozens of crystal pendants around her neck. Despite her age, her eyes had an intense, almost hypnotic quality behind her thick glasses. She spoke with confidence about communicating with the spiritual realm, insisting it was just as real as our physical world. Shortly after getting settled into her room, the psychic patient started telling my colleagues and I about her abilities to communicate with spirits and sense things beyond the physical. Some nurses humored her, while others just gave her a polite smile and went about their duties. Over the course of her stay, the self-proclaimed psychic would occasionally offer to give readings to the nurses and aides caring for her. Most of us played along, taking it all as a bit of fun and a way to pass the time on some of the calmer nights on the ward. Her predictions ranged from vague statements about our personal lives to bold claims about future world events. A few staff members even became strangely convinced by her insights, though most of us remained skeptical. Then one evening, everything changed. The psychic patient pressed her call button urgently. When the nurse came in, the old woman had a grave look on her face. "You need to go check on the gentleman in the side room immediately," she stated. "He has passed away." The nurse was understandably taken aback, but decided to humor the woman and went to check on the elderly man in the private room. To her shock, she did indeed find he had died sometime in the last hour, his body already growing cold. Word spread quickly among the staff, and we made our way to the psychic's room to question her further. With a solemn look, she explained that she had seen his spirit leave his physical body in distress. She described comforting him and explaining that he had died, before helping guide his spirit into the light to pass over to the other side. I'll admit, I had always been the biggest skeptic of her psychic claims. But on that night, hearing her sincere and specific account of what she had witnessed, it made me profoundly uneasy. The idea of spirits walking among us, of being able to sense them, went against everything I believed in. Yet there was no other explanation for how she could have known about the death before anyone else. I tried to push it out of my mind, but her story nagged at me for a long time after that night. You know, ever since I was a little kid, I was always fascinated by the crazy stories my aunt would tell from her days as a nurse. She'd worked at the city hospital for over 30 years, so she had seen some wild stuff. I'd beg her, "Aunt, tell me another one of your spooky hospital stories." With this mix of curiosity and being kinda creeped out, you know? As scared as those stories made me, I couldn't get enough of them. There was something so compelling about hearing these real-life tales of medical mysteries and paranormal happenings. Maybe it was the thrill of having my aunt, the most down-to-earth person I knew, be the one validating that these unexplainable events actually occurred. I hung on every chilling detail, my heart racing even as I curled up a little tighter under the covers. My aunt was one tough cookie. Spent time as an army nurse during the war, so she'd really been through it. Nothing seemed to faze her, but even she couldn't explain away some of the bizarre, unexplainable things she witnessed over the years working those night shifts at the hospital. There's this one story that's always stuck with me, though. It's about this elderly lady who got admitted to the ward. Didn't have any family or friends to look after her. The nurses tried to track down relatives, but it was just her left, all alone. Her husband had passed away years ago, and her only kid, a daughter, had died in a car crash as a teen. So nobody. Well, here's where it gets creepy. From the minute this old lady gets wheeled in, she insists they strap her down to the bed at night. My aunt asks her why, and she gets this haunted look in her eyes. Tells them that when she's sleeping, this dark figure comes into her room and tries to grab her, drag her out of bed. The old woman was convinced if it succeeded, she'd end up dead. Now my aunt, she didn't believe in that paranormal garbage. But there was something about how scared this lady was that made her listen. So for the next few nights, my aunt stayed up keeping an eye on this woman's room. And sure enough, she saw the restraints pulling taut, like some invisible force was trying to tug her out of that bed. After a couple nights, my aunt's shift rotation ended and she passed the old lady's care to another nurse. Problem was, this new nurse didn't get filled in on the situation, didn't strap the woman down before lights out. The next morning, oh man, they found the old lady's body on the floor, limbs all twisted up. But here's the freakiest part. One of her arms was sticking outside the doorway like whatever got her had dragged her right out of that room. Can you imagine? It spooked the whole staff something crazy. No one wanted to go in that room alone after that. My aunt said she'd never forget the sight of that twisted arm stretched across the hallway. She was as no-nonsense as they came, but even she couldn't explain that one away. Made her think maybe there are some things that go bump in the night that are more than just bumps, if you know what I mean. Part of me always wanted to write that story off as her making it up or exaggerating. But I knew my aunt. She had no reason to lie, and she looked haunted as hell every time she told that tale. Whether you believe in that kind of stuff or not, I could never get the image of that outstretched arm out of my mind. I spent over 7 years working as a certified nursing assistant at a long-term care facility. It was a demanding job caring for our elderly residents around the clock, but also incredibly rewarding. The nursing home had been operating for several decades and housed residents requiring long-term skilled nursing care, as well as those there for short-term rehabilitation. My responsibilities included assisting with daily living activities like bathing, dressing, toileting, and transferring residents from bed to wheelchair. I worked hand-in-hand with the nursing staff to ensure each resident's care plan was properly followed. It was challenging yet fulfilling work, though sometimes unsettling experiences occurred. The nursing home itself was a large, aging building with multiple wings and hallways. It had gone through renovations over the years, but parts of the original structure dated back to the 1950s. The place always seemed to have a strange atmosphere, especially at night when it grew quiet. Maybe it was just the ambient sounds and smells of an institution, but an uneasy feeling often lingered. During my time there, I didn't personally experience anything too out of the ordinary, apart from the mysterious call bell issues. The call light system would randomly activate for no apparent reason, no buttons pushed, no rooms showing calls placed. We'd have to go reset the entire system from the electrical room to clear the phantom calls. Odd for sure, but likely just a building quirk. I'd also hear unexplained noises like doors closing, toilets flushing, or faucets running despite no one being around. Eerie at times, but probably just the creaks and groans of an aging facility. These instances were infrequent. However, some coworkers reported more overtly paranormal experiences. A few staff and residents claimed to see the apparition of a woman walking the halls of one wing. She'd silently manifest, then vanish without a trace. Multiple people gave strikingly similar accounts of this woman ghost over the years. One night in particular, a nurse was sitting in her car alone during her evening break. She jumped when she heard a knock at the window beside her. Turning, she saw an elderly woman standing outside staring in at her. But in the blink of an eye, the woman suddenly disappeared into the night without a trace. Understandably shaken, the next day the nurse described the woman's appearance to other staff. Another employee pulled an old photo record from years past, and the description matched a former resident perfectly. A woman who had passed away in 2005 at age 93 after a multi-year battle with dementia. She had been a resident at the nursing home for nearly a decade before her death. Another nurse reported seeing her ghost again in the hallways over the next few days as well. Her ghost was not the only one staff and residents reportedly encountered, but she was the most common and persistent presence said to haunt the building's corridors. No one could say why her spirit seemed so restless, lingering long after her mortal remains were gone. While some phenomena like the call bell issues and random noises could perhaps be explained away, other events raised questions about possible spiritual entities still roaming the nursing home's halls. The facility had cared for so many vulnerable residents nearing the end of life over the decades. Perhaps some imprints lingered of those who had lived their final days within those walls before passing on. In the end, most staff tried to ignore or brush off the sightings as best they could, and simply focus on caring for the living residents.